Let's talk about this new poll from the Wall Street Journal, basically pouring gasoline on the fire of the discourse. Absolutely fascinating. I spent a lot of time yesterday talking about with Andrew Schultz on the Flagrant podcast about this. Everybody kind of seems to have a take, and I'm curious what yours is as well. So let's go ahead and put it up there on the screen. And it talks about how America pulls back from the values that once defined it. So let's go ahead and actually put D2 up there so people can see the visual. I'll read it for everybody who is just listening. Number one is patriotism. In 1998, 70% of Americans considered themselves patriotic. 61% said so in 2019. Only 38% say in 38% say so in 2023. For religion, it was 62% in 1998, 48% in 2019, 39% in 2023. For having children, it's 59% in 1998, down to 30% in 2023. Community involvement was at 47%, actually spiked in 2019 to 62%, but now down to a record low of 27%. And then finally, money, and in terms of what values are, quote, very important to people, money has now gone from 31% to 43%. So my takeaway, Krystal, was that it's easy to be patriotic in 1998. It's unipolar moment, no dot-com bubble. You could buy a house. You could basically sustain a family of four on a single income. So who cares about money? Because money isn't actually all that relevant to your life. You actually are becoming basically rich or richer by participating in general society. Wage inflation had gone down, but it wasn't necessarily, even close to how bad it's gotten now. Also, my takeaway too was that I think that people are viewing this clearly through a left phenomenon. But in reality, if you look at where the major drop in patriotism comes from, a lot of it also comes from the right. And part of the reason why I think that is we have dual narratives of catastrophes that are happening. So clearly, while Trump was president, we had a decline in patriotism because people said, I can't even believe that America would elect somebody like Donald Trump. But if you are a Republican, especially a MAGA type believer, you literally believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. So how can you then believe in your country? You have a dual kind of catastrophizing that is happening where you have lack of faith in the country's most basic institutions from both right and left. In a lot of ways, really the only thing that really unites us at all anymore. On top of that, religion has been going down now for decades, but I think the money piece and the increase of money is not just about the rise of individualism. It's about how much you actually do have to care about money today just to get by. Whereas in the past, it's not something that would have been very important to you when it would have been something where it was more of a foregone conclusion where you'd be able to participate and foster all of these other things. We already know that the main hindrance to people getting married today is money, also having children. People are having less children than they want to, and the main reason that they cite is that it's too expensive. I believe the average childbirth is some $31,000 or something here in the U.S. on top of the $1 million or so that it costs if you want to send a child to college, and I think $250,000 just for raising somebody up through 18 years old. I mean, this is not a small cost that a lot of these families are incurring here, and the reality of even trying to buy a house or any of the foundational types of things are now so out of reach that money has to become more important. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think on a basic level, our economy is supposed to serve the people, and our government is supposed to serve the people. And instead, both our economy and our government serve a handful of elites. So, of course, when you feel like the societal institutions that are supposed to have your back don't, what's that going to lead to among a certain group of people? It's going to lead to a, well, I just got to get mine mindset. And so I think that's where you see the rise in, money being all important, which of course is a core sort of value of neoliberalism anyway, putting profits and cash maximization over everything else. And then also it makes sense in terms of decline of patriotism. If the government doesn't reflect you, doesn't serve you, if the institutions of the economy don't reflect you and don't serve you, which, makes sense coming on the heels of the Silicon Valley bailout discussion we just had, is quite relevant. Yeah, why would you feel patriotic about a country that doesn't seem to be there for you? And Matt Stoller made this point that I thought was pretty profound. Let's put his analysis up on the screen here, his tweet that he put out. Go ahead and throw this up on the screen, guys. You can see a chart. He says these two phenomena are causal America is in a mass die-off. So Americans have become much less patriotic. When your country's systems end up killing your friends and family, you tend to lose your faith. And what he shows is, the graphs we already showed you from this poll, but he also has here the decline in life expectancy that we have seen in the United States over decades and as compared to other nations. So this is a US specific phenomenon. Now, it was accelerated by COVID, but a lot of the underlying things we've covered ad nauseum, Saagar, has to do with a lot of deaths of despair, the fact that you have these mass addiction crises. But I think Derek Thompson has also talked about how it's a whole range of issues where Americans are more likely to die than their compatriots in other nations. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me to see that people don't feel too great about the country when that's the landscape. I'm reminded of a book I read a while ago, maybe in like 2015, 2016, about the American dream and how it was being interpreted, especially by white working class voters in and around Youngstown. Is written by a researcher named Justin Guest. It's called, I think, The New Minority. I really recommend it. And he interviewed a bunch of white working class voters about how they felt about the American dream. And they thought it was dead.
Mm-hmm.
They thought like this idea that you work hard and you get ahead, this is nonsense. This does not reflect my life. And these were people, many of whom their fathers or their grandfathers had been able to get solid middle class union jobs, been able to have the family, been able to have the house, been able to have some vacation time every year. And then they had watched the standard of living in their area, thanks to deindustrialization, decline just over their lifetime. So they weren't able to achieve the basics of middle class stability that their father or grandfather was able to obtain. So, yeah, when I think you have that feeling of like, this American dream is just a load of crock and this country doesn't have my interest at heart, of course you're going to see these kind of trends.
Yeah, and I also think there's just a broader malaise. I mean, you and I were like in the millennial generation. We really have not known in a time in our adult lives of no war and no financial crisis. Like if you lived through like that 1998 number, if I was my age then, so it would be 30 years old in 1998, then the Vietnam War was basically over by the time I was like 8 years old. Then you had the unipolar moment. Yeah, the 70s were pretty bad, but the 80s were pretty nice. And then the 90s were so awesome in terms of mass culture, in terms of money, the economic boom. There was, I guess like the 1982 depression. But, the biggest problem in the 1998 was that the president got a blowjob in the Oval Office and lied about it. And they still had a 62% approval rating when all of that was happening, just showing like how unserious so much of our politics were at that time. Like, why wouldn't you have some high level of patriotism? We would wish for the problems of 1998 today. We had like a budget surplus, right? It's like all these things that were happening that you can't even imagine. And so compare then to compare now, of course. Same with the housing. I think housing is just so foundational to it. You and I see it so much in our audience as well. 1998, a starter home was not outside of your reach. Starter home that was built in 1970, you could buy it secondhand on the market, you could not for that much money, with a decent interest rate, with an income that you could easily pay for. I think about somebody like my parents who moved here to this country in 1998 or 1988, very easily, moved from condo to, modest house, decent neighborhood, be able to, relatively, it was safe. You get to ride the school bus. You don't have to worry about anything. You go to school and your schools are pretty good. And that was a very commonality of life for a lot of people. And that's just gone. That just really doesn't exist for people who are my age or even anybody who's coming to this country now, today. So it's one of those where, the American dream is alive and well for people at the upper echelons of society. They've actually gotten richer literally than ever. But for everybody, if you lost your house in 2000, my favorite stat on this, for everybody who has any assets or whatever, is if you did not sell your house or any of your assets in 2008 and you waited a decade, you not only made money, on that trade by doing nothing, your house dramatically appreciated in value. But the people who lost that, who'd never had the ability to hang on to anything, who basically had nothing already in the system, they became dramatically poorer. So the gap between rich and poor expanded more than we can ever really imagine in that decade after 2008. That's why President Trump became president, in my opinion, for a lot of these reasons. And that's why I think it comes to the heart of so much of our political and economic problems that we have today. It's really sad. It's sad, and it causes a lot of nihilism too. But so I hope that it can be reversed. But you know, we had that discussion with Tim Urban yesterday. I'm not so sure. I think he was right. I think we are in the whirlpool. Like, I think Trump is just the first part of our problems. It's going to be a long way.
It's hard to say. I mean, you know, things can change, dynamics can shift. There's no doubt we're in a sort of like chaotic searching period. I think that's really clear. You know, in a sense, I feel like the declining numbers in patriotism are actually kind of a sign of health in terms of the way the American people are viewing the betrayal of them by both the government and by the you know, economic institutions. Because just having blind patriotism, I don't consider that a positive thing. I think it's good that there's a recognition that this system has failed in some really key and bedrock type of ways that can be a positive impetus for change. So in that way, I see a sort of silver lining here, because you're right. You know, we talk about inflation in the context of just the past year or two, but the reality is the basic bedrocks of a middle-class life, housing, education, and healthcare, have dramatically escalated in cost as to be wildly unaffordable for a majority of Americans. And those are kind of the key markers of a stable, non-precarious middle-class life. So the American people have been suffering under brutal escalating costs for decades now that have, you know, put stability out of reach for so many. And that's why when you dig into these numbers about patriotism and community involvement and all these other things, the places you see the largest declines are among young people, because like you said, Saagar, they've never known another world. Basically, people my age and younger have never known a different world that wasn't, you know, Bush invading Iraq on a mountain of lies and media betrayals and societal institutional failures and financial collapse and escalating crises. You know, that's been the world that we've existed in. So it's not a surprise that there's been a sort of radicalization. To me, it's an entirely rational response to the set of circumstances that we face.
Yeah, I think that's very well said.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.